The hollow ward did not smell of sickness. It smelled of nothing at all. A room scoured so clean of scent that Marlow Vex had come to understand in her final months there that this was its own kind of cruelty. A body needs the world to smell like something. Hers had been fed silence instead. She had stopped fighting the restraints by the second year. Not because she'd accepted the lie they'd built around her. Oath-mad, dangerous to herself, better contained, but because fighting had never once loosened a single buckle. It had only given the attendants a reason to tighten them. Odessa Kane visited exactly once in the final week. She stood at the foot of the narrow cot in a traveling cloak still dusted with dock salt, and she did not apologize. "You made this necessary, Marlow," she said in the same gentle voice she'd used to teach a 9-year-old girl how to read a ledger. House Vex needed steadier hands. That's all this ever was. Marlow didn't have the strength left to answer. She only watched Odessa's face. Memorized it the way you memorize the one thing you intend to carry with you when nothing else survives the crossing. Her heart gave out 4 days later, in the depth of a Concord winter, with no one beside her. Her last thought was not why. It was quieter than that and colder, and it followed her all the way down into the dark. "I will remember every hand that signed the paper that put me here." She woke in her own bed, in her own body, 17 years old and whole, on the exact morning it had all begun the first time. Marlow did not gasp or weep or waste the gift on disbelief. She lay very still, staring at the familiar water-stained ceiling of her chamber in House Vex East Wing, and let the two lives settle into place beside each other like ledgers reconciled at last. Today, she thought with a calm that surprised even her, is the day Odessa brings me the renunciation oath. In her first life she had refused to sign it. She had wept and argued and called Odessa a thief to her face, certain that righteous anger would be enough to save her. It had not been enough. It had only taught Odessa exactly which threats would break her, and given House Kane 3 extra years to tighten every noose in private while Marlow raged uselessly in public. She would not make that mistake twice. She rose, dressed in the same plain gray the young heir apparent always wore, and went down to breakfast with a patience that felt, for the first time in either life, like a weapon she finally knew how to hold. Odessa presented the renunciation oath in the House Vex counting room, the same room where she taught Marlow her letters 20 years before. The parchment was Concord standard, bound at the corners with the pale wax that made an oath unbreakable once signed, vow wax, the dockworkers called it, because a broken vow-sealed contract was said to curdle in the signer's blood. "You're young for this weight," Odessa said, laying the oath flat between them. Her voice was soft, maternal, the voice she'd always used right before she took something. "This simply formalizes what's already true, Marlow. I've been carrying House Vex ledgers for years. This just says so in ink the Concord will honor." In her first life, Marlow had read every line and screamed at every clause. This time she let her eyes drift once slowly across the parchment, not truly reading, only counting the seals, and reached for the pen. Odessa's expression flickered just slightly, the way it had never flickered before. "You're not going to argue?" she asked. "Would it change anything?" Marlow said, and meant it as a genuine question, one she watched Odessa fail to answer. She signed. Her hand did not shake. And underneath the calm, patient stillness she wore like armor, something colder and far more permanent had already begun setting into place. She did not confront Odessa. She did not storm the Concord Assembly, did not send furious letters to the House's remaining allies, did not do a single one of the things her first life had taught her would fail. Instead, Marlow asked to keep a minor post within the House she'd just been stripped of, assistant to the Salt Wharf Registry, a title so small Odessa granted it without a second thought, glad, perhaps, to see the girl she'd broken settle quietly instead of making a scene. It gave Marlow exactly what she needed: access to every shipment, every debt, every hand that touched House Vex ledgers on its way toward House Kane's growing empire. She spent the first season simply watching, writing nothing down that could be found, memorizing names, dates, the particular slant of Odessa's private seal on documents she wasn't supposed to see. The dockworkers had a saying for women who came back from near-ruin patient instead of broken. Salt-bound, they called it, tied to the world by an unpaid debt, unable to rest until the ledger balanced. Marlow heard it once, muttered by an old wharf hand who didn't know she was listening and didn't correct him. Thessaly Rook arrived at the Salt Wharf Registry on an unremarkable gray afternoon, sent by House Kane to formalize the quarterly transfer ledgers. The same oath-binding work she'd done Marlow would learn, for House Kane on the very week of Marlow's renunciation. She was younger than Marlow expected a Ledger-Auditor to be, dark-eyed and unhurried, with ink permanently smudged along the side of her right hand from a lifetime of independent contract work. Independent, unaligned to any house, bound only to the Concord's Neutral Auditors Guild. That detail mattered more than Marlow let herself show. "You're new to this desk," Thessaly said, glancing up from the ledgers Marlow had laid out for her. Not a question. An observation delivered without judgment. "Recently," Marlow said, "you catalog like someone who used to have more to catalog." Thessaly's eyes lifted, studying her properly for the first time. "That's not an insult. Just an observation." Marlow held her gaze a beat longer than was strictly safe. "You're perceptive for someone who spends her days reading numbers." "Numbers tell the truth even when people don't," Thessaly said and went back to her work, and Marlow found herself against every careful instinct she'd rebuilt her second life around, wanting to know what else this woman noticed that others didn't. They crossed paths again the following month and the month after that. Thessaly's independent contracts kept bringing her back to the wharf registry, and Marlow carefully made sure her own small duties overlapped whenever they could. Neither of them called it anything. They shared midday meals over open ledgers, arguing companionably over discrepancies in shipment weights. Thessaly taught her the auditor's shorthand for flagging a falsified entry without alerting whoever had falsified it. A skill, she said, that came in useful more often than any guild liked to admit. "You ask a lot of questions about House Kane's older contracts," Thessaly said one evening, not quite looking up from her work. Marlow kept her voice light. "Should I not?" "I didn't say that." A pause, careful, considering. "I've audited enough houses to know which ones have rot they'd rather no one priced correctly. House Kane keeps 2 versions of its salt tax filings. I've never been able to prove why." It was the first true crack Marlow had found in 3 seasons of patient watching, and it had come to her freely, offered by a woman who had no idea what she was handing over. Or perhaps, Marlow thought later, some quiet part of her already did and offered it anyway. "Why tell me that?" Marlow asked. Thessaly finally looked up. "Because you're the only person at this desk who looks at these numbers like they matter to you personally. I've learned to trust that more than titles." Marlow said nothing. But something in her chest, and used for 3 long seasons to anything but patience, shifted toward a warmth she hadn't planned for and did not know, yet, what to do with. Marlow told herself for a long while that she was using the friendship. That every meal, every shared ledger, every evening spent trading half-truths across a candlelit desk was simply patience wearing a kinder face. It stopped being only that on the night Thessaly showed up at the registry after a storm had flooded the lower wharf, soaked through, laughing despite it, holding a lantern and a bottle of cheap spice wine she'd bought to celebrate closing out a particularly ugly contract dispute. "You look like you haven't celebrated anything in years," Thessaly said, setting 2 cups on the desk between them. "I haven't," Marlow admitted, and it was the truest thing she'd said to anyone since she'd woken up in her own bed with a dead woman's memories. Thessaly studied her for a long moment, the easy humor fading into something quieter. "You carry something heavy, Marlow Vex. I don't know what it is. I'm not going to push." She poured the wine anyway, sliding a cup across the desk. "But I'd rather sit with you while you carry it than pretend I haven't noticed." Marlow wrapped both hands around the cup, and used to being seen instead of managed, and did not trust her own voice enough to answer for a long moment. "Thank you," she finally said quietly, and meant more by it than Thessaly could have known.